So this is the basic thing I'd like to have in every application. There's a view, there's a view model. They communicate through some method on sign-in button clicked, for example. This initiates the sign-in flow from the view model with Rx, goes, sends the request, does something, returns. If it succeeds, you emit a command called sign-in succeeded command, for example. This command is a type of object that the view is always going to be listening to, right? So it keeps listening to these types of commands and handles them in several different ways depending on the view. So if you send a sign-in succeeded command, obviously you're going to want to open the main screen because it succeeded. You can show a sign-in failed command, that's going to show an error dialog. So this helps you a lot with testing to have the architecture look like this. Because when you're going to go test the view model, now all you have to do is test that this function emits one of two commands or three or whatever kind of branching logic you have there. If you're testing for whether the sign-in succeeded, you test for whether the sign-in command was emitted. And the same goes for sign-in failed, whether you emitted the sign-in failed command or not. So this makes it a lot easier to test, and that's why I like it. And that's the architecture I'm going to use here. So how do you make this a reality? What are the classes involved in making this work the way it does? We're going to start with the first file, BaseViewModel. Let's dissect this file. First thing we're going to see is these three member variables. They're provided from the dependencies class, which we're going to define later in this class, to schedulers and resources provider, so that you can grab resources even from within your view models. Next, we're going to see the subscriptions object. This is a composite disposable. Every time we're going to subscribe to a single or a completable, some disposable is going to be returned. This disposable needs to be disposed when you're done with the screen. In this case, in the onCleared function, we're going to clear this object. Next, we have the command subject, which we're going to be using to push new commands onto. And we're going to be observing those through the commands object right below it. The way of pushing is going to be done through the Emit Command function. This function takes a command and pushes it onto the subject. Elsewhere in the base activity, which we're going to see in a second, you're going to observe this commands object, and you have these operators over the command subject hidden. You can only observe. You can't do much. You can't do onNext from outside of this class. That's what the hide basically does. You can only do onNext and push new commands with this Emit Command function. That's it. Scrolling down further, we get to see this beautiful little extension function to the single type. You see here that it calls the subscription method, the one defined above. And inside, it's going to subscribe on the IO scheduler and observe on the UI scheduler for all calls that return a single. So to see that in action, let's jump over and see a sample API call. So here we have the search function. It's going to call the API servers.search if the network is connected. And it's going to call the viewModel subscription method. It's going to pass an onNext and an onError function. What to do with a successful response, what to do with an erroneous response. This will automatically allow the single returned by the search function to be added as a disposable to our object subscriptions, and then have it be disposed later when the view model finishes work. It's also going to automatically subscribe it on the IO scheduler, and it's automatically going to observe it on the UI scheduler. This is something we always do with Rx, so this function just automates that process. If you want to go further, you can even have a function like this for the observable type. You can have one for the observable without an onError. For example, scrolling down, you can see there's one for maybe, there's one for flowable. Whatever kind of thing you like, you can have an extension function like this. And at the end of the file, you have the dependencies class, which we defined here. You can add as many dependencies as you want. And the utility function for all view models, which allows them to facilitate an on-back button clicked, which automatically emits a command close screen. And it just closes the screen. It calls finish. That is it for the base view model class.